I was accused of disrespecting a millionaire, and it didn't end there. It didn't end that night or the next day or even the week after. It followed me. The accusation itself was like a ghost. You couldn't see it, you couldn't touch it, but it was in every room I walked into. And for a while, it almost broke me. My name is Hannah. I'm 34. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a waitress. It's a good job. The restaurant is high-end, the kind of place people go to be seen. The money is good. More than good, it's stable. And I need that stability. It's the foundation of the life I've built for myself. It's everything. I'm good at my job. I'm not just saying that. I'm professional, I'm quick, and I'm observant. I can read a table from 50 feet away. I know who needs another drink, who's ready for the check, who's having a tense conversation and needs to be left alone. It's a skill, and it's one I've worked hard to perfect. The number one rule in a place like that is to remain calm. Always. You are the calm in someone else's storm. You are polite. You are discreet. You solve problems before the customer even knows they have one. You never, ever escalate a situation. That's what I was known for. I was the one they put on the most difficult tables. The demanding ones, the famous ones, the ones with a reputation. Because I could handle it. I never took it personally. It was just part of the job. So when it happened, when he made that accusation, it felt like a personal failure. It felt like the one thing I was supposed to be good at had just crumbled. The night it started was a Saturday. The restaurant was completely full. There was that familiar hum of a busy service, just a constant flow of movement and a quiet conversation. I was in the zone. Everything was running smoothly in my section. Then he walked in. Victor Reynolds. I knew who he was. Everybody who worked in this city knew who he was. His name was attached to buildings, to charities, to everything. He didn't have a reservation. Of course he didn't. Men like him don't need them. Our host knows the drill. A table is always found. One of the best ones, naturally. And that night, it was in my section. I felt that little flip in my stomach. Not fear, exactly. More like a heightened awareness. You just knew you had to be on your A game. There's an energy that comes with that kind of wealth and power. It's an expectation that hangs in the air around them. The world bends for them, and they expect you to be the one doing the bending. I went over to his table. He had 2 other people with him. I did my introduction, the same one I've done 1,000 times. Calm, polite, professional. I didn't treat him any differently than the couple at the next table celebrating their anniversary. That's the key. You treat everyone with the same level of professional respect, but I could tell right away that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted something more. He wanted deference. He had a way of looking at you, not really at you, but more through you, like you were a function, not a person. He made a comment about the table. It wasn't a direct complaint. It was just a remark, loud enough for me to hear. I did what I was trained to do. I acknowledged it. I told him I could see if another table was available, but on a Saturday night, it was unlikely. I said it neutrally. It was just a fact. He didn't like that. I could see a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance. He was used to people just making things happen. My factual response wasn't making anything happen. He ordered a specific, very expensive wine. We were out of that particular vintage. It happens. I apologized for that. I told him we had a very similar one from the same producer, just a different year. Also excellent. Again, I was being a professional. I was offering a solution. But he looked at me like I had personally gone into the cellar and finished the bottle myself. It was this pattern of small interactions. Every question I answered, every request I fulfilled, it was met with this same low-grade dissatisfaction. He wasn't overtly rude. He didn't raise his voice. It was all in his tone. The way he would cut me off mid-sentence. The way he'd wave a hand to dismiss me. I just kept going. I brought their food. I checked on them. I refilled their water. I was a machine of perfect service. I did not give him any opening, no attitude, no emotion, just polite efficiency. And that, I realize now, was the problem. He was trying to provoke a reaction. He wanted me to get flustered. He wanted me to stumble, to apologize profusely, to show that I was intimidated by him. But I wasn't giving him that. I was treating him like any other customer. And a man like Victor Reynolds does not see himself as just any other customer. My neutrality, my refusal to be emotionally affected by him, was seen as an act of defiance. The breaking point was so small, so insignificant, that I almost missed it. He asked for another bottle of wine. I went to get it. When I came back, I was about to pour it. He held up a hand. He told me to just leave the bottle on the table. He would pour it himself. The way he said it was dismissive, final. So I did what he asked. I placed the bottle on the table, and I stepped back. I didn't say anything. I just gave a small professional nod, and I walked away. That was it. That was the moment. My silence, my compliance. In his world, that was the ultimate sign of disrespect. I didn't grovel. I didn't ask if I had done something wrong. I just did my job and left. I continued with my other tables. I tried to shake off the feeling. That feeling of being watched, of being judged. About 10 minutes later, I saw my manager, David, walking towards his table. My stomach dropped. I knew. David was a good manager, but he was a company man. His job was to protect the restaurant's reputation, and the restaurant's reputation was built on keeping men like Victor Reynolds happy. He stood at the table for a long time. He was listening. His posture was apologetic. He was nodding a lot. Victor was talking not loudly, but with an intensity you could feel from across the room. He was gesturing, sometimes towards the kitchen, sometimes towards me. I just kept working. I cleared plates from another table. I took a dessert order. I had to pretend I didn't see it. I had to pretend my career wasn't being discussed right there in the middle of the dining room. Every instinct in me was screaming. I felt a hot, prickling shame. I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew I hadn't. I had been perfect. But I also knew in that moment that it didn't matter. The narrative was being written, and I wasn't the one holding the pen. Finally, David walked away from the table. He wouldn't look at me. He went straight into his office. That was worse than anything. The avoidance. I finished serving my other tables. My hands were steady, but my insides were shaking. I just kept breathing. In for 4, out for 4, just get through the next minute, then the next. When my section was clear, I knew what I had to do. I walked to David's office. The door was slightly open. I knocked. He told me to come in. He was sitting behind his desk. He looked tired. He didn't ask me to sit down. He started by saying that Mr. Reynolds was a very important client, one of the restaurant's most valued patrons. He told me that Mr. Reynolds had felt that my service was disrespectful, that my attitude was unacceptable. He used those words, disrespectful, unacceptable. I just stood there. I waited for him to ask for my side of the story. I waited for him to ask what happened. He never did. He just kept talking. He said the accusation was vague, that Mr. Reynolds couldn't point to a specific word or action. It was about my tone, my demeanor. He said that in this business, perception is reality, and Mr. Reynolds' perception was that I'd been insolent. The word hung in the air. Insolent. It felt like something out of a different century. I tried to speak. I opened my mouth, but only a small sound came out. I am a professional. I am calm. I am controlled. But in that office, I felt like a child being scolded. I finally managed to say that I was just doing my job, that I was professional and polite the entire time. David held up a hand. He told me that arguing about it wasn't going to help. He said that Mr. Reynolds was extremely displeased. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. He told me that Mr. Reynolds had made it clear he expected consequences. He didn't just want an apology. He wanted to know that I had been dealt with. David told me to go home for the night, and that we would talk again tomorrow. He told me to use the time to reflect on my behavior, to think about how I could have handled the situation better. Reflect. I had been doing my job perfectly, under pressure, while being treated like an inconvenience, and I was the one who had to reflect. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out of his office. Walking through the restaurant to get my things was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I could feel the eyes of the other staff on me. They had all seen it. The cooks, the other servers, the bussers, they had seen the interaction. They had seen David at the table. They knew, but nobody said anything. Nobody met my eye. That silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was an acknowledgement of the power dynamic that we all understood. You don't cross a man like Victor Reynolds. You just don't. And the restaurant wouldn't cross him for a waitress, not even a good one. I went home. I sat in my small apartment, the one this job paid for. I didn't cry. I was too numb for that. I just replayed the entire night in my head. Over and over again, every word, every look, every gesture. Was I wrong? Did I have a tone? Was my neutrality actually insolence? He had planted a seed of doubt in me, and it was starting to grow. That's the insidious thing about power. It doesn't just crush you from the outside, it gets inside you. It makes you question your own reality. He was a millionaire, an important man. I was a waitress. Who were they going to believe? Who would anyone believe? The accusation was vague on purpose. You can't defend yourself against a tone. You can't prove your demeanor was appropriate. It's your word against theirs, and his word was worth more. I knew my job was on the line, but it was more than that. My professionalism, my identity at work was being attacked. And I had been told to go home and think about what I did wrong. The injustice of it was a physical weight. It was heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited for the morning when I would have to go back and face them. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. It was going to get so much worse. The heavy oak door of David's office clicked shut behind me, the sound of final, damning period on a sentence I hadn't been allowed to read. I stood in the now quiet hallway, the familiar hum of the dining room, a distant, muffled world I no longer belonged to. My starched apron felt like a costume for a role I had just been fired from. My hands, which had been so steady while holding a tray of crystal glasses moments before, were shaking. I was outside, just like that. The night air was cold, a sharp slap against my heated cheeks. The city lights, usually a comforting blanket, seemed sharp and accusatory. I walked, the mechanical click of my own sensible shoes. On the pavement, the only rhythm in the sudden chaos of my mind. My keys were a cold lump in my pocket. My apartment, my fortress of order and quiet stability, was waiting, but the thought of its silence brought no comfort. The accusation itself was a ghost, and it had followed me home. It wasn't just the words, reflect on your behavior. It was the void they had come from. David hadn't given me a single specific action to dissect. There was no, you spilled the water, or you brought the wrong wine. There was only demeanor and tone. How do you defend against a feeling? How do you argue with a perception? I replayed the interaction with Victor Reynolds in a torturous loop, his initial question about the water. My polite, factual answer, the subtle tightening of his jaw. I had seen it then, registered it as the fleeting impatience of a man used to immediate gratification. He was used to people just making things happen, and my factual response wasn't making anything happen. It was merely stating a fact. And that, I realize now, was the problem. My job was to be the calm in someone else's storm, to absorb pressure, to de-escalate, to be a seamless and invisible facilitator of a perfect evening. I was a machine of perfect service. But in his world, my refusal to be flustered, my professional neutrality, had been read as insolence. My calm was not deference, and he required deference. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, clean, ordered, a testament to the life I had meticulously built for myself on the foundation of that very job. A stack of novels on the nightstand, a yoga mat rolled neatly in the corner, a single orchid on the windowsill. It was a life of quiet contentment, paid for by my tips, by my ability to navigate the complex social currents of a high-end restaurant. Now it all felt fragile, precarious. I peeled off my uniform, folding the apron with the same precise creases I always did, but the ritual felt hollow. I hung up the black slacks and the crisp white shirt. It was my armor, and it had failed to protect me. Or worse, it had been the very thing that made me a target. I stood under the spray of the shower, letting the hot water run down my back, hoping it could wash away the prickling shame, but the injustice of it was a physical weight. I had done nothing wrong. I knew it with a certainty that was bone deep. But in the world that mattered, the world of Victor Reynolds and David in the restaurant, that truth was irrelevant. His perception was the only reality that had currency. Sleep did not come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a courtroom where I was the prosecutor, the defendant, and the helpless jury. Was I wrong? Did I have a tone? Was my neutrality actually insolence? The question circled, insidious and sharp. He had planted a seed of doubt, and my own mind was watering it. This was his power. It wasn't just in his money. It was in his ability to make you question your own reality, to make you complicit in your own condemnation. The sun rose. The gray light of morning crept into my room, offering no warmth, no new beginning. It just illuminated the same anxiety from the night before. I made coffee, my hands moving through the familiar motions. Grind the beans, heat the water. The routine was a flimsy shield against the waiting. I was waiting for a call, for the other shoe to drop. David had said Reynolds wanted consequences. He hadn't said what they were. Would it be a formal write-up? A suspension? Or was I already fired, and this was just a cruel slow-motion execution? The hours crawled, 10 o'clock, 11. With every passing minute, the story I told myself grew darker. My career, my reputation, my carefully constructed life, all unraveling because of one man's wounded pride. I thought of my regulars, the ones who asked for my section, who knew my name, who appreciated my quiet competence. I thought of the younger servers I mentored, all of it erased. At 11:32 a.m., my phone rang. The sound was a siren in the quiet apartment. I looked at the screen. David. My stomach dropped. My hand was steady as I picked it up. A last vestige of the professionalism that had caused all this trouble. Hannah speaking. Hannah, it's David. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual managerial confidence. He sounded like a man delivering a verdict he didn't want to be associated with. Thanks for picking up. I didn't say anything. I just waited. So, he began, clearing his throat. I've had another conversation with Mr. Reynolds' assistant this morning. His assistant. Of course. Reynolds wouldn't deign to speak to David himself. He had people for that. He was, insistent, David continued, the words carefully chosen. He feels very strongly that your attitude was a deliberate show of disrespect. He believes you were trying to make a point. What point, David? My voice was quiet but ice cold. That the bar was busy. He ignored the question. Look, Hannah, in this business, perception is reality, and the perception is that our highest spending client was made to feel unwelcome. I did my job, David. I did it exactly as I've been trained to do for 12 years. I know you're a professional, he said, and the words felt like a betrayal, which is why I've managed to smooth this over. It wasn't easy. Smooth this over. He was framing it as if he had done me a favor, as if he had rescued me from a fire I had started myself. Mr. Reynolds has been placated, David said. But he made it clear he expects to see that we've taken this seriously, that there are consequences. There was that word again, the ghost haunting my every thought. I held my breath. You're not fired, Hannah. A wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. For a split second, I felt a surge of gratitude toward David. He had saved me, but it didn't end there. However, he went on, and the relief curdled into dread. You'll be suspended, without pay, for 1 week. Effective immediately. A week's pay, a week of rent, of bills, of groceries, gone. And when you return, he said, his voice dropping into a tone of grave instruction, we're going to put you on a provisional schedule. You'll be shadowing Mariah for your first few shifts back, just to recalibrate. And for the next month, you will not be assigned to Mr. Reynolds' section, should he return. The humiliation was a punch to the gut. Shadowing Maria. Maria was a wonderful person, but I had trained her. I had taught her how to carry 3 plates, how to read a table, how to anticipate a guest's needs before they even knew they had them. Now I was being ordered to watch her, as if I were a clumsy novice. It was a public shaming, disguised as a corporate policy. It was a message not just for me, but for the entire staff. The house always wins. The money always wins. Do you understand, Hannah? David asked. I understood perfectly. It wasn't about the water. It was never about the water. It was about power. He had been offended, and I had to be punished. I had to be brought low, my expertise invalidated, my professionalism turned into a flaw that needed recalibration. Victor Reynolds hadn't just wanted me gone. He wanted me broken. He wanted me to learn my place. A cold, hard clarity settled over me, displacing the anxiety. The injustice was no longer a vague, shapeless fear. It was a solid thing. It had a name and a shape and a price, 1 week's pay, and my dignity. Hannah? David's voice crackled with impatience. I need a verbal confirmation that you understand the terms. I looked at my orchid on the windowsill, its single, perfect bloom standing straight and unbowed. I thought of the years of hard work, the quiet pride, the life I had built. He could take my money. He could try to take my reputation. But he couldn't have all of me. Yes, David, I said, my voice eerily calm. I understand. And I would not be broken. The walk home was a blur. The familiar rhythm of the city, the screech of subway brakes, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of 100 passing conversations was muted, as if I were hearing it from underwater. My body moved on autopilot, one foot in front of the other, carrying me away from the scene of my own execution. David's final words hung in the air behind me, clinging to my uniform like the smell of grease and regret. A week, shadowing Chloe. It was a masterstroke of cruelty, I had to admit, not a firing, which would have been clean. A firing would have allowed for righteous anger, for unemployment claims and the telling of my side of the story. This was something more insidious. It was a public branding, a slow, meticulous humiliation, designed not just to punish me, but to serve as a warning to everyone else. This is what happens when you don't bend. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm I had painstakingly built, felt different when I unlocked the door. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The four walls I had painted a soft, soothing gray now felt like they were closing in, the color of a cage. I'd bought the couch with 3 months of saved tips. The small, thriving fiddle leaf fig in the corner was a reward for a year of perfect attendance. Every object was a testament to the stability I had forged through discipline and hard work. Now it all felt fragile. One man's whim could shatter it all. The first day of the suspension was the worst. I woke at my usual 6 a.m., my body's internal clock wired for a prep shift. For a dizzying moment, I felt the familiar phantom weight of my apron, the smooth wood of my wine key in my palm. Then I remembered there was nowhere to go. I was a machine of perfect service, and someone had unplugged me. I spent the day pacing. From the window overlooking the street to the small galley kitchen and back again. With each pass, the injustice of it was a physical weight, settling deeper into my bones. I replayed the interaction with Victor Reynolds in my head, dissecting it with the same precision I used to portion desserts. His initial question, my calm, factual answer, the flicker of something in his eyes, annoyance, his follow-up designed to trip me up, my continued neutrality, and that, I realize now, was the problem. He was a man who lived in a world of reactions. He expected fawning, or fear, or flustered apologies. My professional calm was not a service to him. It was a denial of his power. My refusal to be rattled was, in his eyes, the highest form of insolence. I hadn't given him the deference he believed his wealth demanded. So he manufactured a slight out of thin air. Did I have a tone? Was my neutrality actually insolence? The questions that had haunted me in David's office were gone. They were replaced by a cold, hard certainty. It didn't matter what my tone was. It didn't matter what I did or didn't do. My fate was sealed the moment he decided I wasn't sufficiently impressed by him. I hadn't performed my part in the play of his own importance. On the third day, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize and my stomach dropped. Had David changed his mind and decided to fire me after all? Was it Reynolds himself, somehow having gotten my number to deliver another dose of venom? My hands were steady, but my insides were shaking. I answered, "Yes, it's Hannah." The voice was tentative, familiar. It was Liam, one of the senior bartenders, a quiet professional, a man who saw everything and said little. "Liam, hey." "Hey," he said. There was an awkward pause. "Listen, we heard you were out for the week. David said you needed some personal time." The lie was so blatant, so corporate, it almost made me laugh. Personal time. As if I had chosen this, as if I weren't sitting in my apartment counting the dollars I was losing with every passing hour. "Something like that," I said, my voice carefully neutral. It was a habit I couldn't break. "Right, well, look, Chloe's a mess." My breath caught. Chloe, the sweet, eager-to-please girl I had trained just 6 months ago, the one who still wrote her notes on her palm in blue ink. "What's wrong?" I asked. David told her the plan for when you get back, that you'll be shadowing her, he said, the word tasting like ash even over the phone. She thinks it's her fault. She came to me after her shift last night, nearly in tears, asking what she'd done to you. The injustice of it was a fresh wound. Of course, David hadn't explained it. He had simply issued a decree, leaving a 22-year-old girl to believe she was being used to punish her own mentor. It was a way of isolating me further, turning even my allies into instruments of my debasement. It's not her fault, Liam. You know that. I know that, he said, his voice lowering. We all know that. The whole thing stinks. But Hannah, be careful. The story is that you were rude, that you challenged the guest. Challenged. That was the word they had chosen. It was perfect in its ambiguity. It implied a conflict, a confrontation, without having to provide a single detail of what was actually said. It painted me as aggressive, unprofessional. It justified everything. Thanks for telling me, Liam, I said. The words felt inadequate. Just watch your back, he said, and then the line went dead. He had taken a risk by calling me. In David's restaurant, loyalty was a liability. I knew what his call had cost him in potential worry. I was on my own. They knew. He had said it. We all know that. But knowing and acting were two different things. They would watch. They would whisper their sympathies in the stockroom. But when the time came, they would step aside and let it happen. They had their own rent to pay, their own fragile stability to protect. I couldn't even blame them. The rest of the week passed in a haze of anxious preparation. The anger didn't fade, but it changed. It cooled and hardened, shaping itself from a wildfire into a sharp, pointed icicle. I wasn't a victim. I was a professional facing a hostile work environment. This was no longer just about Victor Reynolds. It was about David and this system that empowered men like him. It was about the unspoken contract of the service industry, that the customer is always right, even when he is a liar, even when he is cruel. The punishment was meant to break me, to flood me with a prickling shame so profound that I would either quit or come back as a hollowed-out version of myself, smiling and scraping for every dollar. I would not give them the satisfaction. My professionalism was not a weakness. It was my armor. It was the only weapon I had left. They wanted me to shadow Chloe. Fine. I would shadow her with such unnerving precision that it would make them uncomfortable. I would be the most observant, most diligent, most helpful shadow the restaurant had ever seen. I would perform my humiliation with a chilling degree of competence. I would not cry. I would not complain. I would not show a single crack in my composure. I would be a mirror reflecting their own grotesque power play back at them. You want me to be an object lesson? Then watch closely. On the final night of my suspension, I took out my uniform, the crisp black shirt, the tailored trousers, the polished non-slip shoes. I laid them out on my bed with the care of a soldier preparing for inspection. Each piece was immaculate. My apron was starched and folded into a perfect square. My wine key was polished until it gleamed. I was not the same woman who had worn this uniform a week ago. That woman had believed in fairness. She had believed that competence was its own reward. She was gone. In her place was someone who understood the rules of the game. It wasn't about service. It was about survival. And I was going to survive. I would walk back through that door, look David in the eye, and become the calm in the center of their storm. Let them watch. The week of my suspension was a week of ghosts. The accusation itself was a ghost, formless and impossible to fight, haunting the corners of my apartment. Victor Reynolds was a ghost, his imagined smirk of satisfaction appearing in the reflection of my darkened television screen. Even my own confidence was a ghost, a pale imitation of the solid, reliable thing it had once been. My apartment, once my sanctuary, became a cage. The stability I had worked so hard to build felt like a house of cards, and one man's breath had been enough to make it tremble. I cleaned, I organized, I went through the motions of a life that still felt like my own. But a low, insidious hum of anxiety was my constant companion. It was the sound of injustice. Liam's call had been a small, bright light in this suffocating darkness. Challenge the guest. The phrase was a piece of corporate armor designed to protect the restaurant from any hint of fallibility. It was also a lie, a clean, simple, damnable lie. And in that lie I found my resolve. They wanted me to be broken. They expected shame, apologies, perhaps even tears. I would give them none of it. I would give them perfection. Returning to the restaurant was like walking onto a stage hours after the play has ended. The familiar scent of lemon polish, rich stock, and old wine hit me the moment I pushed through the heavy glass door. The low thrum of prep work from the kitchen, the clink of glasses being polished at the bar, it was the symphony of my life. But on this day, it sounded alien, distant, heads turn. Conversations paused for a half second too long. I saw it all. The flicker of sympathy in the eyes of Maria, our head hostess, the quick averted gaze of a busboy who didn't know what to say, the cautious curiosity from the kitchen staff peering through the pass. They knew. In a place that ran on gossip as much as it did on butter, they all knew the official story. Hannah challenged the guest. I kept my chin level and my shoulders back, my expression placid. I was not a pariah returning in shame. I was an employee reporting for my shift. I walked directly to the locker room, the silence I left in my wake feeling louder than any whisper. My uniform was pressed and pristine. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. I tied my apron with practiced efficiency, the familiar knot a small grounding comfort. Yes, I was a machine of perfect service, just waiting to be switched on. Before I could even step onto the floor, David's office door creaked open. "Hannah, a word." His voice was carefully neutral. I followed him into the small, sterile room. It felt even smaller than I remembered. He didn't sit behind his desk this time. He leaned against it, crossing his arms, a posture that was meant to seem casual but only highlighted his discomfort. He was a man trying to manage a situation he wished would simply disappear. "I just want to set expectations for the week," he began, avoiding my eyes. "This isn't punitive." The lie was so bald, so insulting that it almost made me laugh. I held it in. My face remained a mask of professional calm. "The goal here is a recalibration," he continued, the corporate jargon flowing like a shield, "to re-familiarize you with the tone and atmosphere we cultivate. Chloe is one of our brightest new talents. She has a wonderful, welcoming energy. I want you to observe her. See the service through her eyes, through a fresh lens." I simply nodded. "I understand." He finally met my gaze, and I could see he was searching for something. Anger, resentment, he found nothing, only a calm, waiting stillness. It seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. "Good," he said, his relief palpable. "Just stay with her. A shadow. No interacting with guests, no taking orders. You're an observer, that's all." "I understand, David," I repeated. The words were simple, factual, devoid of the tone he had condemned me for. I was the calm in his storm, and he didn't know what to do with it. Chloe was waiting for me by the sommelier station, her young face a mixture of pity and profound awkwardness. She was 22, talented and eager, and I had personally mentored her for 3 months. I had taught her how to decant a fragile old Burgundy, how to clear a table without ever turning your back on the guest, how to anticipate a need before it was spoken. Now I was her student. The humiliation of it was a physical weight. "Hannah," she whispered, her eyes wide, "I'm so sorry. It's not right." "Your only job today is to do your job, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And my job is to watch you do it. Let's not make it any more complicated than it needs to be." She swallowed hard and nodded. "Okay." And so it began. I became a ghost at her shoulder. The first hour was a blur of familiar rhythms, seen from a new, powerless perspective. I watched Chloe greet a two-top at table 7. Her smile was genuine, warm. "Good," my inner critic noted. She presented the menus from the right as I'd taught her, but she forgot to mention the halibut special. A small oversight, I said nothing. I followed her to table 12, a notoriously demanding group of regulars. I watched her take their convoluted drink orders. She was flustered, her hands shaking slightly as she wrote. My own hands were steady, clasped behind my back. My insides were shaking, but my hands were steady. Every muscle in my body screamed to step forward, to take the notepad, to smoothly interject and clarify that Mr. Henderson preferred his martini with a specific brand of gin, a fact stored in my memory, but not yet in hers. I did nothing. I just watched, a perfect silent observer. The injustice of it was a slow burning fire in my chest. I, who knew the provenance of every bottle on our wine list, who could command a chaotic Saturday night service with nothing more than a quiet word and a pointed look, was now a specter, haunting the edges of the craft I had perfected. I was being punished for my competence, for the very neutrality that allowed me to handle men like Victor Reynolds without crumbling. David watched us from across the room. I could feel his gaze. He wasn't watching Chloe. He was watching me. He was monitoring my compliance, waiting for the crack in my composure. He was waiting for the challenge he'd been told I'd issued. I gave him nothing. My posture was perfect. My expression was neutral. I was the model of deference. My obedience was absolute. And I could see, even from 50 feet away, that it was beginning to unsettle him. An argument he could handle, a protest he could shut down. But this silent, chilling compliance, it was a language he didn't understand. Halfway through the service, Chloe approached a table of 4. A man, loud and expansive, waved his hand dismissively as she began reciting the special she had almost forgotten earlier. "Just get us another bottle of the cab," he said, not looking at her, "and be quick about it." Chloe froze for a fraction of a second. The casual disrespect, so common in this world, had caught her off guard. I saw the slight flush rise on her cheeks, the flicker of hurt in her eyes before her professional training kicked in, and she smiled. "Of course, sir, right away." As she turned, her eyes met mine. In my face, she saw no judgment, only a quiet, shared understanding. In that moment, I wasn't her shadow or her superior. We were just 2 women navigating a world where our best was often not enough. My punishment was blatant, but hers was 1,000 tiny paper cuts, administered nightly. I followed her to the wine station. Her hands fumbled with the corkscrew. "He reminds me of my dad," she mumbled, so low only I could hear. "Always expecting you to just read his mind." My heart ached for her. My instinct, the one that had made me a mentor, was to put a hand on her arm, to offer a word of encouragement. "Breathe. You've got this. Don't let them see it gets to you." But I couldn't. My instructions were clear. I was an observer. So I stood there, silent and still, as she struggled for a moment longer before finally pulling the cork free. The small sound of its release echoed the scream trapped in my own throat. The performance was everything. It was exhausting. And it was only the first day. My job was to be a ghost. For 3 nights, I floated in Chloe's wake, a silent observer tethered to her by a thread of managerial decree. I was to learn from her. I, who had taught her how to balance 3 plates on one arm, how to read a table in a single glance, how to anticipate a guest's need for water before they even felt the thirst. The humiliation was meant to be a public spectacle, a lesson. It was a lesson, just not the one David intended. I became a machine of perfect observation. My posture was immaculate, my expression placid. I stood 2 paces behind Chloe's left shoulder, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I didn't speak unless she spoke to me, which she rarely did. The poor girl was a wreck, her movements made jerky by my unnerving presence. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting me to find fault. I never did. When she presented the wine list, I noted her thumb brushed the embossed crest of the restaurant. A minor flaw, it smudged the gold. I said nothing. When she took an order for a well-done steak without suggesting a butterflied cut, to ensure an even cook-a-tip I had personally given her, the silence in my mind was deafening. But on the outside, I was a statue of serene approval. My compliance was absolute. It was also, I quickly learned, a weapon. The other staff didn't know what to do with me. They saw me standing there, a specter in the familiar uniform, and their eyes would flicker with a mixture of pity and fear. They knew the injustice of it. Liam, the head bartender, would meet my gaze from across the polished bar, his jaw tight. Maria, a career server like me, would give me the smallest, saddest of smiles when she passed on her way to the kitchen. These moments were pinpricks of light in a suffocating darkness. They were also reminders of how alone I was. No one could speak up. To do so would be to invite the same fate. David was the most unsettled of all. He would watch me from his self-appointed post near the entrance, a frown creasing the space between his brows. He had expected contrition. He had expected tears or perhaps a furious, insubordinate outburst that would justify my dismissal. He had not expected this cold, unwavering obedience. He was a man who understood emotional currency: anger, shame, gratitude. I was giving him nothing. I was a void where a problem should be, and it was eating him alive. On the fourth night, the familiar hum of the restaurant was tighter, more strained. A rumor had circulated through the pre-shift briefing. A major food critic was dining with us, anonymously, of course. The news sent a ripple of high-functioning panic through the staff. For me, it changed nothing. I was not a server, I was a shadow. Chloe was assigned a prominent six-top in the center of the room. Her hands were trembling slightly as she laid out the silverware. "Are you okay?" I asked. My voice was quiet, neutral. It was the first time I had initiated conversation in days. She jumped, startled. "God, Hannah, I forget you're there sometimes." She wiped her palms on her apron, a nervous habit I'd tried to train out of her. "It's just the critic. What if they're at my table?" "You'll be fine," I said, and the words were automatic, drawn from a well of professionalism I couldn't seem to drain. "Just breathe. Trust your training." My training, I thought. The irony was a physical weight. The party arrived. 3 men and 3 women, all dressed in the casual, expensive manner that screamed old money. They were loud, laughing, and immediately demanding. Chloe approached, her smile stretched a little too wide. I took my position behind her. As she took their drink orders, I did my own scan of the table. The woman at the head had a small, discreet clutch on the table, a brand known for its quiet exclusivity. The man beside her wore a watch that cost more than my car. My senses were on high alert, cataloging details, anticipating needs. It was an instinct I couldn't turn off. Chloe returned to the bar to relay the complicated order. Liam was already lining up the glasses, his movements fluid and efficient. "Six-top is a handful," Chloe mumbled, leaning against the counter. Liam didn't look at her. His eyes found mine over her shoulder. "Hannah," he said, "just my name. It wasn't a question or a statement, it was an acknowledgement." "I see you." "Liam," I replied, my voice even. He nodded once, then turned his attention back to the drinks. "Chloe, that gin needs a lime twist, not a wedge. Pay attention." His tone was sharp, but it was for her benefit. It was a small act of solidarity, a reminder of the standards I had once enforced, and it was everything. You are the calm in someone else's storm. That was my mantra. But my own storm was raging. My hands were steady, but my insides were shaking. We were halfway through the Six-Top's main course when David appeared at my elbow. His presence was a sudden drop in temperature. "Hannah, a word," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft. He didn't lead me to his office. Instead, he guided me into the short, sterile hallway that led to the walk-in refrigerators. The cacophony of the kitchen was on one side, the muffled elegance of the dining room on the other. Here, in this liminal space, the air was cold and smelled faintly of bleach. He stopped and turned to face me. His face, usually a mask of placid authority, was tight with frustration. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked. I held his gaze. "I'm shadowing Chloe, as instructed." "Don't play games with me," he snapped, his voice low and furious. This act, this silent protest, you think I don't see what you're doing? You're trying to make a point. You're undermining me." The injustice of it was a hot spike in my chest. He had punished me for a perceived tone, and now he was punishing me for the absence of one. My professionalism was my crime, no matter how I presented it. "David," I said, and my voice was chillingly calm. I was proud of that voice. It was the only thing I had left. "I am performing the task you assigned to me. I am observing, I am learning. If you have a different instruction for me, I am happy to receive it. Otherwise, I need to get back to my station." His eyes narrowed. He was searching for a crack, a flicker of the anger he knew must be there. He was used to people crumbling. It was how he maintained control. He took a step closer, invading my space. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? You think because you're good at your job. The rules don't apply. But here's a lesson for you, Hannah. A real one. Men like Victor Reynolds, they don't have to be right. They just have to be heard." There it was, the ugly, unvarnished truth of it all. It wasn't about service. It wasn't about respect. It was about power. My competence meant nothing in the face of his wealth. "I understand," I said. The two words were perfectly neutral, perfectly compliant, and they made him angrier than any argument could have. "Get back out there," he hissed, gesturing sharply toward the dining room, "and wipe that look off your face." I blinked. "What look, David?" He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had no answer. My face was a blank slate, a mirror, and what he saw reflected in it, I realize now, was his own weakness, his own cowardice. He turned and walked away, his shoulders stiff with impotent rage. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I was a machine of perfect service, but a wire had just been tripped. The accusation itself was like a ghost, and now it had a voice, and the voice was David's. They don't have to be right. They just have to be heard. I walked back into the dining room. The lights seemed too bright, the sounds too loud. I resumed my position behind Chloe. She gave me a questioning look. I gave her nothing back. My performance for the rest of the night was flawless. But as I stood there, a ghost in my own life, a new and terrible thought began to form. This wasn't just about weathering the storm anymore. This was a fight. David had drawn the battle lines, and my silence, my perfect, maddening compliance, was the only weapon I had. The question was no longer if Victor Reynolds would return. It was what I would do when he did. David's words hung in the sterile air of the back hallway long after he was gone. They don't have to be right, they just have to be heard. It was a sentence, a verdict on a world I had spent my entire career trying to master, a world I thought was governed by rules of effort and excellence. But the rules were a facade, a polite fiction for people like me. The real law was simpler, more brutal. It was the law of the loudspeaker. The one with the most amplification wins, regardless of what they're saying. That night, the walk home felt different. The familiar city lights seemed sharper, colder. The rhythmic hum of traffic was a low, indifferent growl. The accusation from Victor Reynolds had been a ghost, a phantom of perceived insolence that haunted my shifts. David's words gave that ghost a body. They gave it weight and flesh and a chilling, undeniable presence. The injustice of it was a physical weight. It settled in my bones, a deep, weary ache that had nothing to do with standing for 10 hours. In my apartment, the quiet was no longer a comfort, it was a vacuum, filled only by the echo of that one damning principle. They just have to be heard. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind a frantic projectionist, replaying every interaction, every neutral smile, every efficient, professional gesture. Was I wrong? Had my composure, the very shield I used to navigate the chaos of a Saturday night service, been mistaken for a weapon? The answer didn't matter. My intent was irrelevant. My performance was irrelevant. All that mattered was how it was received by a man who expected the world to bend to his comfort. My professionalism wasn't a shield, it was a mirror. And Victor Reynolds hadn't liked the reflection. By the time the sun bled gray light through my window, a new kind of resolve had cooled inside me. It wasn't the hot fury of the previous day, but something harder, colder. If my professionalism could be interpreted as insolence, then I would give them the most insolently perfect performance they had ever seen. If I was to be a shadow, I would become a master of the art. The next evening, I arrived 15 minutes early. My uniform immaculate, my hair pulled back so tightly it erased any hint of expression from my face. I was a machine of perfect service, switched off. Chloe was already there, her young face etched with a mixture of pity and anxiety. "Hey, Hannah," she said, her voice a near whisper, as if we were in a library instead of the bustling back of house. "Good evening, Chloe," I replied, my voice even and calm. I didn't offer a comforting smile. I didn't reassure her. I simply stood, my posture straight, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I was ready to begin my punishment. The shift started. The familiar hum of the dining room swelled, the clinking of silver and the murmur of conversation rising into a symphony I knew by heart. Chloe took her first table, a party of 4 near the window. I followed, stopping precisely 3 feet behind her, a silent, observant satellite. She explained the specials, her voice a little shaky. I watched her, my gaze analytical. I noted the way one of the diners kept glancing at the wine list, his brow furrowed in indecision. I noted the water glass on the far side of the table was already half empty. My instincts screamed at me to step forward, to offer assistance, to point him toward the syrah that paired perfectly with the braised short rib. My body screamed to move, to fill the glass, to perform the 1,000 tiny acts of anticipation that defined my job. I did nothing. I stood perfectly still. I was a statue of readiness, an engine in neutral. Chloe finished taking the order and hurried away. I remained for a beat longer, my eyes sweeping the table once. Then I turned and followed her at the same measured pace. It was a maddening dance. I was her shadow in the most literal sense, anticipating every need but fulfilling none. When she rushed to the kitchen, I was 2 steps behind. When she approached the table, I was there, a silent witness. I could feel the ripple of my presence through the staff. The other servers gave me a wide berth. The buses avoided my eyes. They knew, and David knew. I saw him watching from the host stand, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was a mask of controlled fury. I was following his directive to the letter. I was shadowing. I was learning. But my compliance was a quiet rebellion, my silence a deafening roar of defiance. He couldn't fault my behavior because my behavior was flawless. I was doing exactly what I'd been told, and it was driving him insane. An hour into the shift, Chloe nearly dropped a tray of cocktails. She fumbled, her face flushing with panic. My hands twitched, my muscles primed to leap forward and steady the glasses, but I locked them behind my back. I watched her regain her balance, a single drop of gin splashing onto the polished floor. I made a mental note. I did not move, I just watched. She shot me a look, a flash of desperate appeal. Help me. I met her gaze, my expression unchanging. I was not her partner, I was her punishment. That was the role David had assigned me. Later, during a brief lull, Liam cornered me near the employee lockers. He held his phone in his hand, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Hannah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to see this." I looked at him, then at the phone. My stomach dropped. I expected a text, a company-wide email, some new edict from David. "What is it?" "The review," he said. "The critic who was in last week, Julian Croft. It just went live." My blood ran cold, the food critic. I had completely forgotten. In the storm of my suspension and humiliation, that detail had been washed away. A review was everything. A glowing one could elevate the restaurant for months. A bad one could be a slow-acting poison. Liam held out the phone. "Just read it." I took it, my own hand surprisingly steady. The headline was splashed across the top of a major city publication's website. Le Cénacle, a symphony of flavor with one curious note. I scrolled past the effusive praise for the chef's new tasting menu, the descriptions of the duck confit and the seared scallops making my mouth water with the professional's appreciation. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, searching, and then I found it, stop. But the true marvel of Le Cénacle has always been its service, a ballet of efficiency that operates with near psychic intuition. It was on full display Tuesday night. Yet, amidst this flawless choreography, there was a peculiar stillness. An observer might have noticed one of the floor's most senior-seeming staff members performing a silent, almost theatrical role, shadowing a younger waitress. Every move the junior server made was mirrored by her silent counterpart. A study and observation so intense it bordered on performance art. It wasn't a flaw in the service, quite the opposite. The restaurant ran like a Swiss watch. But it was a fascinating, unspoken piece of theater. A quiet drama playing out between the courses, leaving one to wonder at the story behind the silence. I read the paragraph again, and then a third time. The words landed like stones, not in my stomach, but in the foundation of the prison David had built for me. Julian Croft hadn't seen a waitress being disciplined. He had seen performance art. He had seen a quiet drama. He hadn't seen my humiliation. He had seen a story. He had seen me. A slow creeping warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. A camera flash had gone off in the dark, and the image it captured was now printed for the entire city to see. It wasn't proof of my innocence, not exactly, but it was proof of the strangeness of the situation. It was external validation that what was happening was not normal. I handed the phone back to Liam. My face was still a mask. but my insides were no longer shaking. They were settling. "Thank you, Liam," I said. My voice was different. The brittle edge was gone. Just then, David came striding toward us, his own phone in his hand. He must have gotten the alert. His eyes found mine, and there was a flicker of something new in them. Not just anger, it was panic. "Hannah," he said, forcing a tight, unnatural smile. "A fantastic review. Julian Croft loves us." He gestured vaguely with his phone. "Don't read too much into the colorful descriptions. Critics like to be dramatic." He was trying to control the narrative, to dismiss the one part of the review that mattered. He was telling me it meant nothing, but we both knew it meant everything. I looked at him, holding his gaze. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to raise my voice. The critic had already spoken for me. "Of course, David," I said, my voice perfectly neutral, perfectly professional. "It's wonderful for the restaurant." I turned and walked back toward the dining room, ready to resume my position behind Chloe. And the weight in my bones hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like armor. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to solidify. The review wasn't a story. It was a grenade rolled gently into the pristine, silent lobby of the restaurant. I read it online the morning after it was published, sitting on the edge of my bed, with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. My apartment, which had become a cell of anxious self-recrimination, suddenly felt different. The air was lighter. You ain't a piece of quiet drama, unfolding nightly, a fascinating bit of performance art, and the words were absurd. Performance art. I was a waitress, stripped of her duties and forced to trail a junior like a ghost. It was a punishment, plain and simple, an exercise in humiliation. But Julian Croft, the city's most feared food critic, hadn't seen humiliation. He had seen intent. He had seen art. He had given my suffering a different name, and in doing so, he had given me a shield. My phone rang, splitting the quiet. The caller ID read "The Restaurant." I watched it buzz on my nightstand, a frantic, angry insect. I knew it was David. My stomach, for the first time in weeks, did not drop. It was still. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, my voice perfectly level. "Hello? Hannah, it's David." He sounded breathless, as if he'd run to the phone. "Did you see it?" "See what, David?" The lie was small, but it was mine. I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted to hear him name the thing that had just upended his carefully managed world. There was a pause filled with the static of his frustration. "The review, Hannah. The Chronicle review. Julian Croft was in." "Oh," I said, my tone a study in mild interest. "Was the food well received?" "The food, yes, the food was fine, but that's not the point. He wrote about you." The last word was an accusation, as if I had personally invited the critic in and staged the entire event. "He wrote about my shadowing, you mean?" I corrected him gently. "The task I was assigned." I could almost hear him grinding his teeth. "He thinks it's some kind of show. People are calling. They're asking about the performance art waitress. They're trying to book tables to see you." A slow, cold satisfaction spread through my veins. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, harder. It was the feeling of a fulcrum shifting. "I see," I said. "Well, I am scheduled to shadow Maya again this evening. I'll be in at 4. "No, wait," he sputtered. We need to talk. Before your shift, come to my office at 3. "Of course, David," I said. My voice was the essence of compliance. I was a machine of perfect service. "I'll be there." I hung up the phone. The accusation itself was like a ghost. It had no body, no substance. It was just a feeling he had, a perceived slight from a man who expected the world to kneel. And now Julian Croft had given me my own ghost to fight back with. The specter of performance art. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. It was everything. Walking into the restaurant that afternoon was like walking onto a stage. The familiar pre-service hum was there, the clink of polished glasses, the low murmur of the kitchen staff, but it was underscored by a new electric tension. Every head turned as I walked through the main dining room toward the back offices. They knew. The busboys, the runners, the line cooks peering through the pass, their eyes followed me. But the looks were different now. The pity was gone, replaced by a kind of bewildered awe. The whispers that had once been about my disgrace were now about my accidental fame. I was no longer just Hannah, the disciplined waitress who fell from grace. I was the quiet drama. I didn't smile. I didn't acknowledge them. My expression was serene, my posture perfect. I was performing whether I wanted to or not. The role had been assigned to me. I knocked once on David's office door. "Come in." He was sitting behind his desk, but he stood up the moment I entered. It was the first time he had ever done that. A small, almost imperceptible concession of ground. His face was pale, his tie slightly askew. The veneer of the unflappable manager was cracked. "Hannah, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. The same chair I had sat in when he'd suspended me. I sat, placing my hands calmly in my lap. I waited. The silence was a weapon, and I had become an expert in wielding it. He cleared his throat. "So, this is a situation." "It is," I agreed. "Look, this whole thing has clearly been a misunderstanding," he began, his hands fluttering on his desk like trapped birds. "A misinterpretation on everyone's part." I said nothing. I just watched him. I watched the sweat bead on his temple. He was used to managing problems, to smoothing things over, to making them disappear. But I was not a spilled drink or a comp dessert. I was a person, and the injustice of it was a physical weight in the room. Julian Croft, he obviously saw something that wasn't there. He's a critic, they're dramatic. David continued, trying to build a narrative that absolved everyone, especially himself. But the fact is, the restaurant is now getting a lot of attention for this. The wrong kind of attention. You mean the kind of attention that exposes your internal disciplinary procedures to the public? My voice was soft, but the question landed like a stone. He flinched. "That's not..." I was trying to de-escalate the situation with Mr. Reynolds. "By punishing me for an accusation he never even clearly defined," I asked. Another question. Calm, precise. Was my neutrality actually insolence? Did my professionalism read as disrespect? "You never asked me for my side, David. You just accepted his." "He's Victor Reynolds." He finally burst out, his voice rising. "He's a patron of this restaurant, a very important one. What was I supposed to do?" "Your job," I said, and the words were colder than I intended, "which is to manage your staff. And that includes protecting them from the baseless whims of a wealthy man with a fragile ego." "You didn't protect me, David. You managed me. You managed me right out of my position and into a public spectacle." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The truth of my words hung between us, stark and undeniable. His entire strategy was built on capitulation to power. He had no defense against someone who simply refused to break. He sagged back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want, Hannah?" he asked, his voice low. It was the question I'd been waiting for. This was the moment. The power had shifted. It was no longer about his judgment of me, it was about my judgment of him. "First," I began, leaning forward just an inch, "the shadowing ends, effective immediately. It was a demeaning and unjust punishment, and it is over." He nodded quickly. "Of course, done." "Second, I want my section back, not a different section. My section, the 6 tables by the window." "Yes, absolutely," he said, relieved. He thought this was the end of it. He thought I just wanted my job back. "And third," I said, my voice dropping even lower, "I want a formal, written apology from you on behalf of the restaurant for the accusation and the subsequent handling of the situation. It will state that a review of the circumstances found the claims of disrespect to be unsubstantiated." His eyes widened. This was not a simple transaction. This was a demand for accountability. A written apology was a document. It was proof. It would be a permanent record of his failure. "Hannah, I can't..." "You can," I interrupted, my tone leaving no room for argument. "You will put it in my employee file. It's not for public consumption. It is for me. It is the truth of what happened here." He looked from my unwavering eyes to his frantically tapping fingers. He was trapped. The performance art waitress held all the cards. If he refused, what would I do? Would I speak to the press that was now so intrigued by me? Would I quit and let the narrative spin wildly out of his control? He didn't know. And that uncertainty terrified him more than anything. "All right," he finally conceded, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "All right, Hannah." I stood up. "I will need the night off to receive my written apology." I'll expect it by email tomorrow morning. I'll be back for my shift tomorrow at 4 at my station. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of his office, closing the door softly behind me. As I walked back through the dining room, the silence that followed me was different. It was no longer just curiosity. It was respect. The kind of respect that is earned, not demanded. I had won. I had faced down my manager and the system he represented, and I had won. But as I stepped out into the cool evening air, the victory felt hollow. David was just a symptom. He was the weak link, the path of least resistance. The source of the poison, Victor Reynolds, was still out there, untouched and unaware of the quiet drama he had authored. This wasn't an ending. It was an intermission. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that he would be back for the second act. The word hung in the air of that sterile office, heavier than any sound. Yes. It was not a victory cry. It was not a concession shouted from a fortress under siege. It was a single, clipped syllable of surrender. David had folded. My demands, which had felt so audacious and impossible moments before, were now just a set of conditions he'd agreed to. My stomach did not soar with triumph. It unknotted itself, slowly, painfully, like a fist that had been clenched for a week. I watched him, this man who held the keys to my professional life, and saw nothing but exhaustion. He was not sorry for what had happened. He was sorry it had become a problem he could no longer manage with platitudes and punishment. "The letter," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll wait for it." He flinched, as if he'd hoped I would accept his word and float away. He wanted this to be over. He wanted me out of his office. But the accusation itself was like a ghost, and I needed a formal exorcism. I needed proof. He turned to his computer, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The silence was filled with the furious clicking of his keyboard. He typed like a man composing his own ransom note. I stood there, perfectly still, my posture the same as it had been when I'd shadowed Maria straight, silent, observant. A pillar of unsettling calm. I could feel my own power now, not as an aggressor, but as an immovable object. I had become the calm in his storm, and it was unnerving him. He printed the single sheet and slid it across the desk without looking at me. He couldn't meet my eyes. I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. The restaurant's letterhead was embossed at the top. The words themselves were a masterpiece of corporate non-apology, a carefully constructed paragraph that admitted no fault while simultaneously retracting the consequences of that unadmitted fault. It spoke of a misunderstanding regarding service expectations and confirmed that after a review of the situation, my record was cleared of any formal complaint. It was everything, and it was nothing. It was a shield, but a brittle one. "Thank you, David," I said. The professional courtesy was reflexive, a gear clicking into place. I folded the letter once, twice, and slipped it into my pocket. It felt both as heavy as a stone and as flimsy as a moth's wing. I turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The familiar hum of the dining room rushed in to meet me, a sound that had once been a comfort and was now a tightly wound source of anxiety. The staff watched me emerge. They knew. In a place like this, secrets traveled faster than a food runner. They saw me walk not to the locker room, but to my station. Station 4, my station. Maria, who was setting silverware on one of my tables, looked up. Her eyes wide, she gave me a small, hesitant smile. I nodded back. It wasn't a victory lap, it was a reclamation. I was no longer a shadow, I was back. But the ghost of the accusation followed me, a chill that the warmth of the dining room couldn't quite burn away. The next 2 weeks were a study in feigned normalcy. I worked, I served, I moved through the controlled chaos of dinner service with the same fluid efficiency I always had. I was a machine of perfect service, but something had fundamentally changed. The work, which had once been a source of quiet pride, was now a defensive posture. Every smile was a calculation. Every neutral inquiry about a guest's satisfaction was a carefully deployed shield. The Julian Croft review had made me a curiosity. Guests who had read the article would sometimes glance at me a little too long. I could feel their eyes on my back, trying to see the performance art, the silent, dignified protest. They were looking for a story, and it made me feel like an exhibit. My co-workers were caught between admiration and fear, Some gave me nods of solidarity in the service corridors. Others avoided my gaze as if my defiance was a contagion they couldn't afford to catch. David was a ghost. He communicated with me only when absolutely necessary, his voice clipped, his eyes always focused on a point just over my shoulder. He was a man haunted by the problem he had failed to solve. I was a ghost too, a ghost in my own life. I'd won, but the injustice of it was a physical weight. The apology letter sat in a drawer in my apartment, a document I couldn't bring myself to throw away, but couldn't look at without a fresh wave of prickling shame. I had been forced to fight for a job I had never once failed at. I had been punished for my competence, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it wasn't over. It could never be over until he came back. The name appeared on a Tuesday. I was glancing over the reservation manifest for the upcoming Saturday night, a habit of mine, mentally mapping out the flow of the evening. And there it was. Reynolds Victor, party of 4, 8:12 p.m., table 41. Table 41, my best foretop. The table with the discreet corner view of both the dining room and the city lights. His table. My stomach dropped. It was a clean, sudden plunge like stepping off a cliff in a dream. My hands, which were resting on the host stand, remained perfectly steady. Inside, a tremor started. His name was a drop of poison in a glass of clean water. The sight of it confirmed the dread that had been my constant companion for weeks. He wasn't just coming back to the restaurant, he was coming back to my section, to the scene of the crime he had invented. This was not a coincidence. A man like Victor Reynolds did not believe in coincidence. He orchestrated events. He was used to people just making things happen. And his request for that specific table in my station would have been honored without question. He was coming back to finish what he started, to see if his power held or if my small, absurd victory had truly changed anything. My first instinct was a flare of pure animal panic. I could ask David to move the table to another section. I could feign sickness. I could quit. The thoughts were cowardly, and I hated them. I hated the way the mere presence of his name on a piece of paper could undo me. Quitting was surrender. Asking to be moved was admitting he had won, that he had successfully chased me from my own territory. No. I had a letter in my drawer that said I was cleared. I had the praise of a powerful critic branding me a performer. I had fought my way back from the shadows. I would not retreat now. The rest of the week was a long, slow crawl toward Saturday. Every night, I would go home to my quiet apartment and the silence would feel accusatory. Was I wrong? Did I have a tone? Was my neutrality actually insolence? The old questions returned, whispering in the dark. I would pull out the letter, read the sterile, evasive words, and feel a flicker of resolve. It was my only armor. Saturday arrived, gray and damp. The air itself felt heavy with anticipation. As I dressed for my shift, my movements were precise, automatic. Black trousers, crisp white shirt, black apron tied just so. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes dark. I looked like a soldier preparing for a battle I was not sure I could win. At the pre-shift meeting, David was a wreck. His movements were jerky. His smile stretched too thin across his face. He kept wiping his palms on his trousers. He pulled me aside as we were breaking up. "Hannah," he started, his voice low and conspiratorial. "About table 41 tonight. If you're not comfortable, I can give it to Michael. No questions asked. We can just say we're accommodating a last-minute seating change." He was offering me an escape. Not for my sake, but for his. He didn't want a repeat of the drama, the phone calls, the bad reviews. He wanted a smooth, profitable Saturday night. My dignity was a small price for him to pay for that. I looked at him, really looked at him, and the last of my fear burned away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "No, David," I said. My voice was level. "It's my table. I'll take it." He looked relieved and terrified all at once. "Okay, Hannah. Okay, just be careful." Be careful. As if I were the one holding the match. At 7:59 p.m., the world seemed to slow down. The familiar hum of the restaurant faded to a dull roar in my ears. The hostess approached me, her expression tight. "They're here." I took a deep, steadying breath and turned. Victor Reynolds stood at the entrance, surveying the room as if it all belonged to him. He looked the same, impeccably dressed, an aura of expensive, dismissive confidence radiating from him. He was with the same woman and another couple. He wasn't looking for me, not yet. They were led toward my section, toward table 41. Every step they took felt like a drumbeat, counting down to a final confrontation. I stood by my service station, my hands at my sides, my spine straight. I watched them settle in, Reynolds taking this seat that faced out into the room, his throne. For a full minute I did not move. I let them get comfortable. I let him think, perhaps, that I had been reassigned, that he had won. Then I picked up 4 menus and started the long walk across the floor. The space between my station and his table felt a mile long. I could feel David's eyes on me from across the room. I could feel the curious stares of my coworkers. I ignored them all. My focus was a laser beam pointed at that table. I arrived. I stood at the head of the table, a position of professional neutrality. "Good evening," I said. My voice was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of my profession. "Welcome back?" I distributed the menus, my movements economical and precise. I did not rush. I did not tremble. Victor Reynolds took his menu, but he didn't look at it. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement, and fixed his eyes on me. There was no anger in his expression. There was no flicker of annoyance. There was something far worse. Amusement. A slow, condescending smile spread across his lips. He was looking at me the way a scientist looks at a specimen under a microscope, a specimen that has behaved in an unexpectedly interesting way. He let the silence stretch, savoring it. Then he spoke, his voice just loud enough for the table to hear, but intended only for me. "Ah," he said, his smile widening. "The famous one. It's good to see management recognize your unique talents." He paused, his eyes glittering with malice. "Tell me, are you performing for us again tonight?" His words hung in the air, a slick and oily film coating the familiar hum of the dining room. "Are you performing for us again tonight?" The question was not for me. It was for his audience. The 2 men and 1 woman at his table, their smiles frozen somewhere between amusement and discomfort. It was for the adjacent tables, whose conversations had subtly lulled. It was for David, who I could feel watching from the edge of the floor, a statue of pure anxiety. My training, the thousands of nights spent navigating the delicate egos of the wealthy and powerful, kicked in. It was a physical reflex. My shoulders, which had tensed for a microsecond, relaxed. My breathing, which had caught in my throat, steadied. I held the leather-bound menus against my hip, my posture unchanged. My insides were a different story. My stomach dropped. A plummeting elevator with the cables cut. A cold, prickling shame washed over me. The same shame from that first night, but this time it was laced with a new and unfamiliar anger. He had taken my victory, the apology, the reinstatement, the quiet vindication, and twisted it into a public joke. I met his gaze, his eyes were alight with smug triumph. He was waiting for me to falter, to blush, to stammer, to show any sign that his arrow had hit its mark. He wanted a reaction. He fed on them. I would starve him. I offered a small, professionally serene smile. It did not reach my eyes. I knew it didn't. That was the point. "The only performance tonight, sir," I said, my voice level and low, "is the one from our kitchen. The chef has prepared a remarkable pan-seared halibut with a saffron risotto. It's the true star of the show." I had not answered his question. I had not acknowledged his taunt. I had simply pivoted, absorbing the force of his attack and redirecting it toward the neutral ground of the menu. It was a verbal parry, clean and precise. A flicker of something in his eyes, annoyance. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that same condescending smirk. He leaned back in his chair, a king surveying his court, and opened the menu I had just placed before him. The others at the table followed his lead, the tension momentarily broken. I took a step back, my hands clasped behind me, giving them their space. I was a machine of perfect service. The order was a test. I knew it would be. Reynolds didn't just order. He interrogated the menu. He questioned the provenance of the scallops, the exact temperature of the water they were blanched in, the farm that grew the microgreens for the garnish. His companions shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't a man ordering dinner. It was a man establishing dominance. I answered every question without hesitation. "The scallops are diver caught off the coast of Maine, sir. They arrived fresh this morning, never frozen. The blanching water is precisely 180 degrees Fahrenheit to firm the texture without cooking them through. The micro arugula is from a hydroponic farm upstate. It has a more peppery finish than the soil-grown variety. I did not consult my notes. I did not need to. This was my craft. I knew the menu backwards and forwards, knew it like I knew the pattern of my own breathing. He was used to people just making things happen, and my factual responses weren't making anything happen. They were simply facts, cold, hard, and unimpeachable. He finally settled on a steak, ordering it in a way designed to be difficult. Medium rare, but I want a cool red center, not a warm one. The sear needs to be deep, a proper Maillard reaction, but I don't want even a hint of a gray band beneath it. Can your chef manage that? It was an impossible order, a contradiction in terms. A deep sear creates a heat gradient. A gray band was almost inevitable. It was a trap. I will convey your exact specifications to the chef, sir, I said. My tone was a flat line of professional deference. I made a neat, precise note on my pad. The note was for show. The message had already been sent. As I turned from the table, I caught Liam's eye across the room. He was polishing a glass, his movement stiff. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated fear for me. He knew what Reynolds was doing. They all knew. The wine was next. Reynolds waved away the sommelier with a flick of his wrist. No, I want her to handle it. He pointed at me. David, who had been hovering near the kitchen door, took a half step forward before thinking better of it. This was Reynolds' stage, and I was his unwilling co-star. I approached the table. How may I help you with the wine list, sir? I'm feeling like a Burgundy, he announced. Something with presence. Earthy, but with bright fruit. Good structure, nothing flabby. He tapped a finger on the list. What do you know about this one? He was pointing at a 2015 Domaine de la Romanée Conti. It was the most expensive bottle on our list, a wine that cost more than my rent for 6 months. It was also a wine so famous, so universally revered, that asking about it was like asking a librarian if they'd heard of Shakespeare. It was another power play. That is an exceptional choice, sir, I said calmly. The 2015 vintage was remarkable for its balance of concentration and acidity. You'll find the earthy notes of sous-bois and mushroom you're looking for, but with a core of black cherry and raspberry that remains incredibly vibrant. The structure is formidable. It will drink beautifully now, but it could easily age for another 30 years. I spoke with the quiet confidence of an expert, because I was one. I had studied for years, passed exams, dedicated countless hours to understanding this subject. It was a part of my professionalism, a part of the stability I had built for myself. He stared at me, his mask of condescension slipping for a full second. He had expected me to be intimidated, to fetch the sommelier, to admit ignorance. He had not expected a lecture. Fine, he clipped, and we'll have that. As I retrieved the bottle from the cellar, my hands were steady, but my insides were shaking. This was not service. This was combat. Every interaction was a skirmish, every correct answer a deflection of an incoming blow. The injustice of it was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I wasn't just serving a meal. I was defending my own dignity, my own right to exist in this space without being broken. The ritual of presenting and opening the wine was a silent battle. I performed it with the focus of a surgeon. The presentation of the label, the clean cut of the foil, the perfect noiseless extraction of the cork. I poured a taste for him, my hand unwavering. He swirled the wine, held it to his nose, and finally took a sip. He held the liquid in his mouth for a long, dramatic moment. The entire table watched him, holding their breath. He swallowed. It will suffice, he said, not looking at me. He dismissed me with a subtle wave. It will suffice. The two most dismissive words in the English language. A judgment delivered from on high, designed to communicate that even in my perfection, I had barely met his minimum standard. I poured for the rest of the table and retreated, the blood pounding in my ears. The rest of the meal passed in a state of hypervigilance. I cleared their plates with silent efficiency. I refilled their water glasses before they were ever empty. I was a ghost of perfect service, present only when needed, invisible otherwise. Reynolds ignored me completely, which was somehow more unnerving than his direct attacks. He was letting me simmer in my own anxiety, forcing me to wait for the other shoe to drop. It dropped with dessert. He had ordered a chocolate lava cake. I placed it before him. He picked up his fork, cut into the center, and watched the molten chocolate ooze onto the plate. Then he put the fork down. "Waitress," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge. I was at his side instantly. "Sir?" He leaned in, lowering his voice so only I could hear. The others at the table were engrossed in their own conversation. It was a manufactured intimacy, and it made my skin crawl. "I just have to know," he whispered, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "When you were shadowing that other girl, crying in the staff meal, did you really think a little article in the paper gave you power here?" The accusation itself was like a ghost. It followed me. His words were a punch to the gut. He knew, of course he knew. He had likely been told every detail by a deferential David. He wasn't just attacking my professionalism now, he was reaching into my past, into my moments of private humiliation, and holding them up to my face. This was his endgame. Not to find fault with the food or the wine, but to crack the facade, to see the hurt, to make the performance real. My throat went dry. For a single, terrifying moment, I felt the professional mask slip. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes. I felt the tremor in my hand. He saw it, I know he did. A flicker of a predatory smile touched his lips. He had me, and that, I realize now, was the problem. He thought he had me. I took a breath, a slow, deliberate inhale. I held it for a second, gathering the scattered fragments of my composure. I let it out. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I did not acknowledge his question. I did not acknowledge the cruelty. I looked at his dessert. "Is there something wrong with your cake, sir?" I asked. My voice was a ghost of a whisper. Perfectly calm, perfectly professional. His smile vanished. My refusal to engage, to give him the emotional reaction he craved, had disarmed him. He was left holding a weapon that I refused to acknowledge was even a weapon. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. The silence stretched. "No," he finally bit out, his voice tight with frustration. "There is nothing wrong with the cake." "Very good, sir," I murmured and retreated. I had won. I had stared into the abyss of his malice and refused to fall, but as I stood by my station, catching my breath, I felt no triumph, only a profound and chilling emptiness. This wasn't over. It didn't end that night. He had shown me that he could touch me whenever he wanted. He had shown me that no wall of professionalism was high enough to keep him out. He wasn't trying to get me fired anymore. He was just enjoying the game, and I was the prize. The door swung shut behind Victor Reynolds, and the sound was a final, soft punctuation mark on the evening's performance. The familiar hum of the dining room rushed back in to fill the void he'd left. A wave of noise and clatter that suddenly felt alien and too loud. My hands, which had been so steady carrying his plates, now trembled as I stacked them on my tray. It wasn't relief that washed over me. It was something colder, sharper, a dread that settled not in my stomach, but deep in my bones. He wasn't trying to get me fired anymore. The thought was a perfectly formed piece of ice in my mind. The game had changed. This wasn't about a complaint or a review. This was personal. He had found a new sport, and I was the fox. The thrill for him wasn't in the kill. It was in the chase. It was in watching me run, in seeing how long I could maintain my composure while he circled, relentless and smiling. "Good work tonight, Hannah," David said, appearing at my elbow. His voice was low, conspiratorial, as if we were allies who had just weathered a great storm. He was looking at the closed door, not at me. He seemed satisfied. I looked at him, truly looked at him, at the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, the forced ease in his posture. He saw a problem contained, a wealthy client placated. He saw a successful transaction. He didn't see the predator that had just walked out the door, and he didn't see the prey standing right next to him. To him, the night was over. "Yes," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the warmth I usually reserved for a manager. "He was." David nodded, pleased with my simple confirmation. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture meant to convey camaraderie that felt like a brand. "See, a little professionalism goes a long way." He walked away, his relief palpable. I watched him go, the weight of the plates in my hand a grounding force. professionalism. He thought that was my shield. He didn't understand. My professionalism was the cage. It was the rulebook Reynolds was using to torture me. It didn't end that night. That was the last time I ever felt a sense of finality when Victor Reynolds left. From then on, his departures were merely intermissions. He became a recurring character in the story of my week, not every night. That would have been too predictable, too merciful. His appearances were sporadic, a Tuesday, a Friday, sometimes twice in 1 week, sometimes not for 10 days, leaving me in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. His name in the reservation book was a small black mark that foretold the tone of my entire shift. Reynolds, party of 2, 8 cells p.m., server request, Hannah. The request was the cruelest part. It was a formal declaration of his ownership of my time, sanctioned by the very management that was supposed to protect me. David saw it as a victory. "He likes you," he'd said once, with a baffling lack of awareness. "You've won him over." I had won nothing. I was a captured prize, put on display at the victor's whim. The game evolved. The impossible food orders were child's play, the opening moves of a far more intricate match. He began to probe the boundaries of my world, testing the walls I had so carefully constructed between my job and my life. One evening, he brought a woman with him. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't just look at me. They assessed me. Reynolds barely spoke, instead watching as she engaged me in conversation. "That's a lovely pin," she said, gesturing to the small silver bird I wore on my apron. "A gift from my sister. Does it have a story?" "It was a gift," I replied, my voice even. "From someone special," she pressed, a gentle therapeutic smile on her face. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Reynolds watched me, a faint, curious smile on his lips. He was studying my reactions, cataloging them. The woman was a tool, a new kind of pressure applied to a different part of my armor. A psychologist, perhaps? A profiler? The possibilities were dizzying. I answered her polite, probing question with polite, vacant answers. I was a fortress of perfect service, but the fortress was beginning to feel like a prison. The attacks grew more insidious. He started leaving things for me with the bill. Never money, not beyond a standard tip. They were objects, statements. The first time, it was a small leather-bound pocket dictionary. I found it lying next to the signed credit card slip. I opened it. A single word was circled in red ink. Insolent. My breath caught in my throat. It was a message, a reminder of where this all began. A quiet, vicious little, "I haven't forgotten." I closed the book, my hand steady, and slipped it into my apron. The weight of it was immense. Another night, it was a single, perfect white rose laid carefully on the table. When I picked it up, I saw that all the thorns had been meticulously removed except for one left right where my fingers would close around it. I felt the sharp prick, saw a tiny bead of blood well up on my thumb. I looked over at the door he'd just exited. He knew I would pick it up just so. The game was no longer confined to the restaurant floor. It followed me. The walk home, once a time to decompress, became a gauntlet of imagined shadows. The familiar city sounds, a car backfiring. Footsteps behind me took on a sinister edge. My apartment, my sanctuary, began to feel less like a haven and more like a temporary hiding place. I started double-checking the lock on my door, then triple-checking it. I'd stand in my living room in the dark, listening, holding my breath at the groan of the building or the sirens in the distance. The accusation itself was like a ghost, but Victor Reynolds was a far more tangible threat. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted. And what he wanted, I was beginning to understand, was to see me break. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday in November. The restaurant was busy, a warm, glowing haven from the wind whipping outside. Reynolds was there, of course. He was alone this time, which was rare, and I soon learned far more dangerous. He was quiet for most of the meal, his silence more unnerving than any of his previous provocations. He just watched me as I moved through the section, my practiced, efficient ballet of service. I could feel his eyes on me, a physical pressure on my back. When I came to clear his main course, he finally spoke. "You're very good at this," he said, his voice a low murmur. "All this control, it's impressive." "Thank you, sir," I said, not looking at him, focusing on the plate. It must be exhausting, he continued, maintaining the facade. I placed the plate on my tray and straightened up. For the first time, I allowed myself to meet his gaze directly. His eyes were dark, devoid of any real emotion except a chilling academic curiosity. Is there anything else I can get for you? I asked. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not a pleasant smile. You know, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost conversational. That third-floor walk-up must be murder on your feet after a night like this, especially with that drafty window in the living room. You should really get that fixed before it gets any colder. Time stopped. The clatter of the kitchen, the murmur of the diners, the soft music, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All I could hear was the frantic, panic drumming of my own heart. That drafty window in the living room, the one I'd put tape over just last week, the one that looked out onto the fire escape. He had never seen my apartment. He had never been to my street. He couldn't know that. It was impossible. But he said it with such casual certainty, the same tone he used to order a bottle of wine. It wasn't a guess. It was a statement of fact. My training, my years of professional composure, screamed at me to remain still, to show nothing. I was a machine of perfect service, but a machine can be broken. I felt a crack spread through the porcelain facade I had so carefully maintained. My breath hitched. My meticulously steady hands, the hands that had never once betrayed my inner turmoil, trembled. He saw it. His smile widened. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had found the final key. He had breached the last wall. The game wasn't just on the restaurant floor anymore. He had followed me home. I stood there, frozen, the tray in my hand feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The injustice of it was no longer a weight. It was a physical chokehold. He had won. He had finally gotten the reaction he craved, a flicker of genuine, undiluted fear. He nodded slowly, as if to himself. No, he said softly, answering my earlier question. There's nothing else. He signed the bill and stood up, adjusting his cuffs. He walked past me without another glance. I remained there for a full minute, rooted to the spot. Then, on autopilot, I took his plates to the kitchen, finished my shift, and walked out into the cold night air. Every shadow was a threat. Every passing car held his face. When I got to my building, I took the stairs, my heart pounding with each step. I unlocked my door, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries. I stepped inside and closed it, leaning my back against the wood, sliding the deadbolt, and fastening the chain. I stood in the darkness of my own home, my sanctuary. But it wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was just a room, a vulnerable third-floor room with a drafty window. He was everywhere now.